Hello, listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Shooting Rabbits in a Barrel, a podcast brought to you by Scarecrow Consultants. I'm delighted today to be joined by fellow Scarecrow, James. Hey, James, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jess. How are you?
I am fine, thank you. I'm glad to be back in the studio, after the last episode's live edition. So you know how this works.
I
I'll
do.
remind our listeners. We asked two questions on shooting rabbits. What story would you like to share with us today, and what valuable lesson did you learn? So, James, what story would you like to share with us today?
I'd like to share the story of how a previous employment came to a sudden end.
Okay, I'm intrigued already. Whenever you're ready.
Yeah, so before I worked with Scarecrow, it must at least be a decade ago, because obviously Scarecrow are 10 this year.
We are.
Um, I used to work with an organization which provided training for model-based software development. And in particular, one of our biggest customers was a high street retailer who I'm sure everybody will know, but who I'm not going to name.
Okay.
But what I will say is that they really pride themselves on their customer service. That's one of their big selling points. And as part of the training, I used to deliver, in fact, I developed and delivered a one-day training course in Spark's Enterprise Architect. And the way that the training course worked is that they had a set of training laptops. I think there were probably about 12 or 14 of them. And they were used across a variety of courses for various IT functions. So the Sparks EA training was just one of them. I think they also did software development and various other tool training. And they were looked after by a particular department in IT. And the training function was a separate entity within the organization. And so what used to happen is the IT department would turn up on the day of the training with all the laptops in some crates. They would usually help me, or if they were not there, I'd do it on my own to lay them out along the desks, turn them all on, check they were working, and we would do the day's Spark CA training. Now, as you can imagine, if you're doing tool training, it's very important that the tool is set up in a consistent way. Because I would say, if you look at menu option B, you'll find this.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to this directory, you'll find these files, which I want you to open. And that's how it would work. And there was always teething problems with this setup of the laptops. There were never anything serious. It was just like out of the 12 machines, it might be that two of them were on a slightly different version of the software, or two of them, or perhaps or more, had not properly been cleared down from the previous course. So there were other files on the desktop which confused the delegates. And as I say, these were never particularly big problems. In the worst case scenario, I had all the files on a zip drive, so I could just reinstate them on a machine. And it was just a slight inconvenience because you had to break the course at that point. But it was not necessarily a big issue. But the one thing is that obviously the impact is slightly different from both sides. So from a trainer's perspective, that's slightly annoying. But if you're the delegate who hasn't got the file where I tell you it should be, or hasn't got the menu option, which I tell you should have, you're never completely sure whether or not it's because you've done something wrong or there's something wrong with the setup. If you're new to something like Sparksy as well, it's a bit bewildering. There's lots of options.
Oh yeah.
And so it was not great from their experience point of view, and we acknowledge this. And one thing this organization were very good at, they were very good at feedback. So we would give out feedback forms at the end of the course, and we would generally get something like 80 to 90% of them back. They were really good at giving us feedback and pointing things out. And that's really because they wanted it to be better for everybody else. So they would really help us improve the course. And so periodically, I can't remember how often it was, but we would get together as a training department and we would go through the feedback and we'd see how we could improve the course. And regularly, one of the things was, can we make it so that the setup is more consistent across the laptops? And so we tried various things. We changed the process. We had the people from IT there to explain to them what needed to happen. And everybody was very cordial. And we said, yeah, we'll do this. And yet these minor issues persisted from time after time after time. And we never really did any root cause analysis. But looking back, I kind of think that what the problem was is that we got to effectively 90% perfection. And the effort to get us to 100% was just too much for anybody to really put that effort in. What it would have meant is that every time they rebuilt the laptops, somebody would have had to gone through each one with a fine-tooth comb to check that it was exactly how it needed to be. And also the problem with that was that the IT people were rebuilding the laptops based on the forthcoming course, and they didn't necessarily know the details of what was going to happen in the course. They just knew that they had to put this software onto this machine.
Mm-hmm.
And so, excuse me. And so, as I say, it never really seemed worth it to put that extra bit of effort in to get the machines up to 100%. Excuse me, because the overall impact was not such that it warranted that effort. Excuse me. And so there was a little bit of a mismatch there in that it was slightly frustrating for the delegates. It was less frustrating for the trainer, for me. And the amount of effort required from the IT people was disproportionate in order to resolve that. So we kind of lived with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way that it worked. But nevertheless, every time that we had a review of the training feedback, the consistency of the laptop build would come up in some form or other. And we'd go round the loop again about, can we make this better? And ultimately, I came to the conclusion that we couldn't. It's just something that we would have to live with. I mean, I think the analogy that I would use is a lot like the dissatisfaction you get from delivery companies when you buy something online, which is the thing that you've ordered is really important to you, but for the chap who's delivering it, it's one of, perhaps 1,000 parcels he's going to deliver that day. And he can't afford to put in the amount of effort that you would like him to put in, because he's got to do that for 1,000 parcels.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a mix match in the priority of these things. And it's something about the nature of the relationship. But anyway, from my perspective, I don't think it ever affected the learning outcomes or the learning experience. Sorry again. Of the training, but it was slightly frustrating. Anyway, after a number of years of doing this, the usual thing happened. Somebody went through the feedback, and they sent me an email and said, "Can we get together in our office in London, and we'll go through how we can improve this aspect of the training." In some respects, this was quite nice for me because I was on a very nice consultancy rate, and so if they wanted me to go in for a 2-hour meeting, I'd get a wonderful whack of consultancy fee.
Holla!
Yeah, so it's like, oh, well, from a money point of view, this is nice, but we've been doing this for several years now, and I don't really think that there's any point in doing this. And so I sent an email with my systems engineering hat on, and I said, I appreciate your efforts in trying to perfect this, but we've tried this several times. And I said, I went through this with person X when they were in your role. I went through this with person Y when they were in your role. And now you're asking me to do the same thing. And as I say, I appreciate that you're trying to improve this, but I don't think we can. And this is the important part. I said, because I don't think that the IT team has the capability to resolve this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're a systems engineer, you'll know that we use the word capability in a very specific way. We use the word capability to mean the ability of an organization to perform a task. And there's no shade associated with that word. So we appreciate that organizations can do some things and they can't do other things. And if they put their mind to it, they can acquire the capability to do new things, but that's an activity they need to go through. Now, the problem is that if you're not familiar with that particular language from the ISO standards, then in general use, the opposite of capability is incapable, and incapable does throw a lot of shade. And so the way that they read that was me saying, we've tried this several times and we can't do it because you're rubbish.
Mic drop.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, no.
Well, what happened then was there was some radio silence. So there was no reply to this email. One of my colleagues who I'd copied in sent me an email that said, there may be some fallout from this email. To which I was completely bemused. I was like, why would there possibly be any fallout from this? All I've done is point out that I don't think the organization has the ability to do what they're asking. There's no shame in that. I did also say, by the way, in the email that I didn't think there was any negative impact because we were always able to resolve the issue on the cause. But anyway, lo and behold, to me, discussions began in the background with my colleagues, the result of which was that the organisation in question decided that they never wanted to use my services again. And my engagement with that particular organisation ended at that point there.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so to answer your second question, which is what valuable lesson did I learn? The valuable lesson is that what words mean to you are not necessarily what words mean to other people. And so it's really important to have a common vocabulary, because misunderstandings like that can happen. Now, I'd like to think that it's quite rare for a misunderstanding of such magnitude to occur, but they can happen.
Yikes. Thank you for sharing that, James. I'm reeling a bit. As soon as we finish this call and stop recording, I'm going to ask you who it was, but that's not for our listeners. Okay, a follow-up question, because when we're often defining this common vocabulary in engineering projects, there is a conversation that happened, and I feel like potentially your issue could have been resolved if they had responded and said, "Oh, that's interesting. Why do you think that?" And you could have explained.
Yeah.
So there's usually a negotiation that goes on. Where have you seen this play out better in your experience, if you have?
Yeah. So there are actually two things here, I think, which is important. One is that the opportunity to resolve that probably never occurred because I was not involved in what you might regard as capability development. And so I wasn't involved in that conversation about that. I was observing that from the outside. So I didn't really have the opportunity to influence the language beforehand. But where it does work is where you are involved, you can simply define those terms. And it's important to work out what the organization uses to describe those things. Now, it may well have been that they never had a concept of capability or an equivalent. They may never have got to the stage of defining what they could do as an organization and what they were less good at as an organization, or perhaps not even able to do as an organization. But had that ever been an activity, then obviously we would have had to come up with those terms. Again, as systems engineers, we're very happy to adopt the terms that are used in standards. That's something that we do. We realize that it saves us a lot of time if we do that. I suspect that in this particular organization, if they had have used a standard for that, they may have used a different one, possibly one from the British Computer Society or an IT related one. And it may be that there's a different word used for that. Actually, in hindsight, I'm rather really pleased that I didn't say anybody didn't have the competence, because I think incompetence would have been even more serious.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Wow. That was dodged.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for sharing that.
No, thank you.
I'm still a bit like, but thank you for sharing that mildly distressing story with us.
I should reassure the viewer by saying that thankfully I did have other work at the time.
Good,
thank you. And so while it was distressing for the relationship to end suddenly like that, it was always anticipated the relationship would end at some point, and so it was fine.
Okay, thank you.
And also that I'm still very good friends with lots of people that I worked out there. So
excellent. A happy end. After the event. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us, James.
Thank you.
I hope to have you back on here again soon. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. And if you want to get involved, you can contact us at rabbits@scarecrowconsultants.co.uk, and we'll see you again next time.